Often we need buttons on a form, and there's a few different ways that we can add a button. So we're going to add some, but we want them to be all the way at the bottom, actually even out below the field set. So we're going to go down below the field set and we're going to add a div. And let's go ahead and give that div an ID so that we can add some style in a minute. So we'll just call this our button div. And then in here we can add buttons. So now these ones are, the first one I'm going to show you is an input type button. But you can do the value. When you're doing buttons, when you put the value, that's what's going to be printed on the button itself. So I'm going to say click me, and then I'm going to add an on-click attribute. For this type, what this does is use to call a function. So you might have a function that you've written in your JS file, right, in your JavaScript file. We aren't there yet, but once we learn JavaScript, we can call a function this way. And then the type is button. So that's what it looks like. So let's go to the web page and refresh. And there we get a button. And notice what the text is. It's whatever we said in the my value. And now if we click on it, nothing happens. And that's because we don't have that function. And we can verify that by getting into the developer tools. And it shows, so normally we've been looking at the elements section, and that's still very valuable. But if you go into console, that gives you error reports on JavaScript. And this is saying my function is not defined. And so we're using a function that hasn't been defined. So nothing's happening. Well, it turns out we don't actually need this type of a button in this form. The type of button that we need is going to be a little bit different. So we're going to, the type is actually going to be, we're going to do two. One is a submit type, and this type actually submits the form. So it's a button, and when you click on it, it submits the form. And we don't need the on-click attribute for this one, but we do need the value, so we can have it say whatever we want it to say. And we just want to do submit my survey. All right, so now if we go back and see how that looks, we refresh. There we get this button that is submit my survey, and when we click on it, it actually submits the form. And it goes to that JavaScript file, which gives us a message, no invalid data detected. We will retain data for further testing. So this is just that example JavaScript file that's just been put in there to catch it so it didn't submit to that URL. And so that's the message that we get when it submits. And that's how you get a submit button. It's just of type submit. The other kind of button that we want to use is type reset. And now what reset does is it resets the whole form. And we also want to put words on that, not submit, because that will really confuse people. So let's just put cancel. And so if we refresh, there we have a button that is cancel. And it will really clear things. So if we put, it resets it back to what it was at the beginning. So no matter what we've done, what we've entered anywhere, when we click cancel, it clears everything and sets it back to the initial state when you entered things. So there we've got a submit button and a reset button. This isn't really where we want them. So let's go ahead and add some style to clean this up. So if we go into the rbforms.css and we go down to form button styles. So here we're going to add a selector for a div with an ID button, buttons, and we'll do text align and put that in center. That'll center the text inside the button. And we want to put a width at 100%. And so those are the ones that we want on the div itself. So let's go see what a difference that makes by adding those styles on the div. So we'll simply refresh and notice what it did. Because we made the div width 100%, then it no longer fits up here, right? It has to be 100%. So it drops down below and it centered the content. By using the text align, it centered those buttons in the middle of that div, which takes up the whole width. So that's how it does when we set the div. We also want to put some style on the input elements themselves. So we'll do an input and we'll use an attribute selector to be able to identify which ones we want this to be set on. So we want it to be set on the submit element, and then we'll use a comma because we also want it to be set on the input element with, the input element with the attribute type equal to reset. So we put reset in there, and that gives us two different selectors, right? One for inputs with type equal to submit, and one for inputs with type equal to reset. And we'll change the font size. So we'll make the font size a little bit bigger, 1.2 EM. And we'll make the padding a little bit bigger, so give a little bit of space around the outside, so 5 pixels. And we'll do the margin. And the margin gives a space between elements, and so we'll do a 15 pixel margin. So if we go look at how that impacts it, and there we put some space between them, we made the font a little bit bigger, put some padding inside those buttons. And there we have a submit and a reset button.